25 years of exploring new worlds, new ideas, and new people. Years of entertaining conversation, stimulating information. Join the Celebration 25 with
Bill Jenkins.
Welcome to a Saturday night on KABC, an open mind. And that's what we're going to do for the next 3 hours. Open your mind, open my mind, and see what we find in there. At the moment, I think you won't find too much in mine. It's going to be one of those nights, gang, as I came down to work. I brought all of the information for our good friend and our guest for tonight, Mr. Robert Monroe, the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences. And our subject was the out-of-body experience and his fascinating new book called Far Journeys. I brought everything but Bob's telephone number. So we are now busily trying to wake up my wife, who is sleeping some distance from the telephone because the telephone number is right there in my briefcase. Meanwhile, we're going into our files around here, so we're just kind of waiting to try to get a hold of Mr. Monroe. He is back in Virginia tonight. He was going to try to be with us tonight. He couldn't be because of a change in his itinerary, so we were going to do it on the phone. We did want to talk about his new book, Far Journeys, and I do recommend it to you very much. It's a fascinating look at the work that they have been doing with the explorers at the Monroe Institute. We were also going to perform this little experiment, have the explorers come here during the show, look into some boxes that were sealed, and only the skeptics who were there knew what was in the boxes. And in talking to Robert Friday, he's not going to be able to do that either tonight. We will do that sometime in March or April, as everything is just kind of falling apart on us tonight. So until we find Bob's number, or get my wife to give us the number, we will just have open lines here and talk about anything that you may want to talk about. Let me give you the telephone numbers. In Los Angeles, 520-TALK, T-A-L-K. We will get through to Bob. Don't worry about it, but just it's just very embarrassing at the moment. 520-TALK, T-A-L-K. The Los Angeles number. The San Fernando Valley number is 990-TALK. All the numbers, of course, end in TALK, T-A-L-K. In Orange County, it's 750. In the Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena area, the number is 244. San Gabriel Valley is 448. And South Bay, your number is 679. And if you're down in the Long Beach, San Pedro, Paramount area, your number is 639. Now, we were to talk about the out-of-body experience. I'm not one to talk to you too much about it because I've never been able to do it. I have tried. I have gotten close. We have John and Karen Erickson here in the studio. They were a couple of our skeptics that brought down the box to be gone through by the out-of-body travelers. Have either one of you gone out-of-body? You have?
Yes. Yes.
Karen? You have gone out-of-body?
Yes.
Where did you go?
Not very far.
Hit the red button there.
Oh, here?
Uh-huh.
Is that it?
There you are. Get close to a microphone.
Here's the microphone.
Where did you go?
Well, I didn't really travel any place. What happened was I was getting ready to go to bed, and I sat on the bed. John was already in bed. I don't remember if he was asleep or not. And as I was laying down, and I was not asleep at all because I wasn't even in the bed yet, I suddenly realized, and this sounds crazy, but and this is in another place where we had high ceilings, high beam ceilings. I was on top of the ceiling, and I was looking down at myself, getting into bed, going to sleep, and John already laying there sleeping. And I knew what it was that had freaked me out.
Made you feel like a peeping Tom.
Well, I don't know if it made me feel like that exactly, but I just suddenly went. It frightened me a little bit, even though I knew what it was, and I really wanted to be doing it. But at that exact moment, since it wasn't planned, totally unexpected, it frightened me, and it snapped me right out of it, and then I was back in the bed before I knew it. And I've tried and tried to do it again, and I haven't been able to.
You've never been able to go out since
No,
then?
it was spontaneous, totally.
A lot of times it is a very spontaneous thing.
And I wish it would
happen
happen again.
They say it happens to a lot of people who are in great pain.
Yeah.
Who want to leave the pain behind.
Push the red button there, Bob. There you go, John.
Well, I've heard people tell me that people who are in great pain and with some terminal illnesses or something that where they're very, very uncomfortable, they will leave the body so they don't feel it.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because next week Diane Morrissey will be here with the near-death experience that she has been doing so very much research into, and this does happen in the near-death experience. It is a type of out-of-body experience, I think, where they do come back when perhaps they most likely thought they were going to go on beyond.
We had a friend of ours who explained the whole accident he went into with a head-on collision with a truck in Italy, and he saw the truck come, and suddenly he was catapulted out of the truck before the crash, and was up above looking down and saw the whole thing happen. And he was telling himself, "This isn't my time yet. This isn't my time. I'm going back." And he went back. But he remembered seeing everything and everything happening up there.
Spiritually, he was up there.
Yeah.
Or his consciousness was up there. His body was down in the wreck.
Yes. And he didn't experience any of the pain or anything during the time it happened until he got back down again.
It happens to runners also. As they are really pressing and getting beyond, they'll move out of their body just a little bit. I've had runners tell me that they watch the back of their head as they're running along.
I've heard that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've heard that. It's not happened to me. I've done it.
And that stops a little bit of that pain that happens, from exercise. Pulls it out. So the out-of-body experience is a fascinating thing, and perhaps you have some questions about it or some things that you want to relay about it as we do the best we can to wake up my wife and get Bob Monroe's number so that we can get him on the telephone, because I know he's standing by in Faber, Virginia, to talk to you tonight about his new book, Far Journeys. I'm Bill Jenkins. It's Open Mind. I'm Bill Jenkins. We got the number, and we have Bob Monroe. Bob, how are you?
Fine, Bill. How are you?
Well, I came down here with all the pieces of information I should have had except your telephone number.
I wondered about that.
However, we do have a diligent staff. Ron Carr and his group, they went to work and found it. We were unable to arouse my wife, who was sleeping at home by my briefcase, wherein was the number.
Well, at least it worked somehow, did it not?
It did. And you're on, and we're so delighted that you're with us tonight. The book, Far Journeys. There are some journeys in there that are unbelievable.
You got a chance to read it then?
I had a chance to get into some of the journeys. I'm going to go back and finish it. We're talking about your explorers dealing with people who are living in different levels, who don't even understand what physical life is all about.
That's right.
So why don't we just kind of go from the beginning about who the explorers are, how that's operating, and what they're doing, and why we're doing all of this.
Well, there's many questions involved that you're putting there, and one of them is why we're doing it. First of all, I can't properly answer why we're doing it. To say the least, beginning about in 1975, I would say, we began a rather intensive series of training of specialized subjects in a laboratory. The outcome of that is an ongoing group of people that we call explorers, and we call them that simply because in one form they're very much that. They are exploring other states of consciousness and other reality systems, utilizing some of the methods and techniques that we've developed over the years. What else can I say except that the best way that one gets a feel for what they encounter is to say that it is the most difficult type of material to translate into a time-space reality. And one of the main problems, therefore, is to help these explorers learn how to do that, to translate what they perceive and do in this out-of-body state into a form that we can understand here now. So that's the beginning anyway.
Well, that's the beginning, and I think a lot of that happened because you, for some reason or another, just decided to inadvertently jump out of body, and that began to fascinate you.
That's quite true. This goes all the way back, of course, to 1958 when I was quietly minding my own business, running a company in New York, and then began to inadvertently start the whole concept or the whole business of moving out of my body. And from that, trying to find out which way this is, what it is, first of all by going to our normal mental and psychological, psychiatric interviews and probing, tried to find other answers, and we're going all the way back into 59 and 60. The result was very negative. The first response was, well, I am all right physically. The second, the best answer was that I was very sane, so I must be doing conscious dreaming. And the parapsychologists in 1960 said that it was very interesting, but they had no data. And another recommended that I spend some 10 years at least over in India at some ashram studying under a guru who purportedly might know about such things. Being somewhat of a stubborn sort and having some R&D funds in my company, I said, well, let's see if we can do something about this at a Western level. As a result, I began doing R&D in, that is, research and development into this concept of what is this out of body. And that began a long evolution, which ended up where we are now, I suppose. And first of all, I guess it was back in 1970, 71, I published a book called Journeys Out of the Body, which spread throughout the world in terms of an information distributing thing and an inquiry thing as to what other people were doing in the out-of-body state. And so that went on, and it's still going on. And then here came a book called Far Journeys.
Well, you know, Bob, of course, Journeys Out of the Bible is, or out of the Bible, out of the body.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, well, out of the Bible. We'll get into that in a couple of weeks, I guess, around here. Is one of the more definitive works, I think, until Far Journeys came along.
Yes.
We're going to pause right now and going to call you back. Our line is not as good as we'd like it, so we're going to try another circuit, okay?
All right.
And continue on with our conversation tonight with Robert Monroe, founder of Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences. Their prime function there is to do research and development and exploring in the out-of-body state and about the out-of-body state and what that's all about. I'm Bill Jenkins. It's Open Mind. Monroe, the founder, president of the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences. And what they do at the Institute, and they have been doing for many years now, is to very seriously and scientifically investigate this phenomenon known as the out-of-body experience. And indeed, they're explorers, as they're called, who get into a Faraday cage, and out of body they go. Out of body they go, and they go to wild, wild places. And finally, Bob has released some of the information about where they have been going and what they've been doing in his new book, which is just now hitting the stands, called Far Journeys. It is a fascinating piece of reading. We had Bob on the line. The line was not all that good, so we're trying to reconnect with him right now, and so we can hear him better. It was just a little difficult the way it was before, and he has so many fascinating things to say to you. I think about one of the most fascinating of all subject matters that we can get into. Bob, let's try that line. Are we any better?
Well, we've tried 3 others. How's this?
Well, that seems a little bit better. It is better.
All right.
Okay, let's go on. So after Journeys Out of the Body, your enterprise has grown quite a bit there.
Yes, one of the primarily as a result of a number of different discoveries that we've made along the way. And we hesitate sometimes to call them discoveries. It's simply perhaps a synthesis of many old ideas put into a new form. We're not sure. But in essence, we developed methods that in turn helped improve human consciousness. And we have been using those in a number of different ways. Primarily, it's a technique, a non-invasive technique of application of sound to create a frequency following response in the human brain. And in developing and evolving this, we found it very efficient to help change human consciousness. In the simplest form, we can help people go to sleep or help them stay awake. And you take everything in between, and you see what we have.
That's your hemisyncing process.
That's right.
Well, it does work. My son just obliterated his knee here this last summer.
Oh, gracious.
And in that cast, I gave him those hemisync tapes, and I says, because he's having a hard time sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And I says, maybe you can do something Dad has never been able to do, Ross, and that's go out of body. But he went through the entire program there. He hasn't told me whether he went out of body or not, because if he did, he probably wouldn't want to hurt my feelings, because, Robert, I have not been able to make that trip yet.
Well, one of your problems is a very fundamental one, and that is that you can't get your left brain out of the way far enough. And I often suffer with the same problem, and find that I use a very simple technique now that makes it easier. Obviously, it won't take place unless you get about 2 sleep cycles, which is, say, 3 hours sleep, and then awaken after that, and not forcibly, but of your own accord. And there you are, deeply relaxed, wide awake, rested, and it becomes quite easy to detach yourself from the physical at that state. Mm-hmm. Simply roll out. That's the best way I know of for anyone who has difficulty in such methods.
I am going to do it.
No. You got to understand why you want to do it, first of all. Why would you want to do that so badly?
Well, it's, if I talk about it, I like to experience everything that I bring forth here on these microphones, from walking on fire to doing all of the other things that I get involved in.
Well, my offer still goes, Bill, and it's been a couple of years anyway, that if you can break out from that mad, wild activity of yours and drop back here for a short period of time, I think that's the most productive thing you could do to get into some of these more advanced states of consciousness, that's all. And come back and be my guest. I'd love to have you.
Well, I'm just going to take you up on that one, because I think that's the only way. Kevin Ryerson, when he was in trance here, a trance medium, went into trance, and Tom McPherson, who lived 400 years ago, comes through and talks through Kevin. You read about him in Shirley MacLaine's book, Out on the Limb. He said that I used to be a terror on the astral level, and I'd been grounded.
That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, I was on probation. So I could terrorize everybody here on this level.
Well, that could happen, So it doesn't mean it's bad. You see, that's you that says it's bad.
Well, I just have been grounded, that's all.
No, they just say that you can just get into an interference factor, and so... If you interfere too much, well, somebody says, we can't have that passed around, and so they set up barriers against you.
Get back to California and stay there for a while. What are, the fascinating things that the explorers are finding? And there are so many questions that I'm going to ask you, and that I know the audience wants to ask you too, Bob. But let's start first. In the out-of-body state, there's more to it than just tooling around the neighborhood, is there not?
Well, slightly more. First and foremost, I think this is the basic problem. One has to sort of rearrange your belief system in order to properly work in such an area. This is perhaps the greatest, and underlying that is a fear barrier, which is the biggest inhibitor beyond that. And you have to overcome those 2 factors before you can do anything in something called the out-of-body state. How do you do that? Well, think of yourself as you are right now, in spite of what you may consciously or left brain desire. You're much as if you're in a clearing, and that's your area of knowledge and experience. And that clearing's in the middle of a great dark forest, and that's the unknown. And you have a inherent instinctive fear of that unknown, and that's generated by the culture in which you live, first of all. Mm-hmm. And that unknown and that fear of it is certainly the major barrier, and the means that we employ to circumvent that fear is something that is worth discovering and using. And this is why any other methodology will not work unless you get to that point where you no longer have the fear. Paradoxically, the next, after you have overcome fear, you have another fat barrier, and that is you can't get too excited about it. If you get too excited, all of a sudden you lose control of this out-of-body state, and back you come.
Well, that I have experienced. Now, I have gotten very close. I have felt the rushing sensation. I have felt the sort of quaking thing that you talked about in your first book.
Mm-hmm.
And I get so excited and say, hey, I'm getting ready to go, that I wake up.
That's exactly what happens.
So how do you overcome that, Bob?
Well, you have to sort of approach it obliquely. The best way is sort of, oh, here I am. I'm just in the process of lifting out. Isn't that interesting? Not exciting, but interesting. It's a different approach. And then simply let it happen.
Of course, now I got the idea the cops are going to be over there waiting for me, saying, "You ain't coming over, boy. Back down."
Well, you can have a nice stand-up conversation with anything like that, and find out it's not nearly what you think it is.
I'm sure it isn't. What are the explorers finding out?
Well, what are they finding out? Where can you possibly start? Bear in mind that in all of our work has been dealing primarily with human consciousness in the belief that improving that consciousness will therefore improve man's understanding of what he is, who he is, why he is, and then as a result of that, he will then so improve what he is, what he's doing in his future.
Mm-hmm.
So we deal in consciousness, and we don't try to detract or alter consciousness. We do our best to enhance it, which is a great difference. Because you can't report anything if you lose that part of consciousness that you have now. And that's another part. This is, again, part of an instructional procedure. What are we learning? Well, first and foremost, we learn that there are three methods that one can use in communication, and we did learn that there is a method of communication that is paramount to it, and to any communication system with anything other, with other states of being than the physical human, and that requires what we call nonverbal communication, where words are not used. And this is, again, words can be used, but they're so limiting that you have to learn this other method of communication, which we call NVC, or nonverbal communication. It's much as if you totally experience instantaneously all of, if I communicated to you what, that I have a sore big toe, I can say it in words, but if I can send this whole thought to you, as it were, of having a sore big toe, you'll know instantly all the feelings about it. And you'll know what I mean without any words. And this is the fundamental of other intelligent communication. It doesn't deal with words and figures and numbers and things like that.
But just the sum total of thought.
That is correct. So this is one of the things that we learn, is that we have to make that quantum jump in the way we communicate. And anything less than that is like listening to two notes on an infinite scale. And those two notes are totally inadequate to describe where you are, what you're doing, and what you're perceiving, and any information that you gather. Now, the information that you gather in such out-of-body states or such communication is of a, I guess the best word to say is of a cosmology that for the most part is not in keeping with what we understand in terms of time, space, physical universe, and patterns like that. It's from an overview that is so, I don't like to use the word alien because it's really not that, but it's from a perspective. If when you were to see the Earth, for example, from the moon, as our astronauts did, they obtained an entirely different perspective of the Earth and the people who are now on it.
Mm-hmm.
This is much the overview of time-space that you begin to receive the information from, that type of perspective, and it's most fascinating how it comes out.
As I recall, in our previous conversations, your explorers usually go at least in pairs.
Not usually, but occasionally is a better word.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
They have to learn to communicate then non-verbally with each other. If they're...
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And after they get over that hurdle, I guess they can go on. What are some of the more interesting places that they have journeyed to?
You got to remember that we, this is has been the play part of our work, such exploring.
Mm-hmm.
Play in the sense that we do other things, and then when we want to play or to have release from the type of very slow, systematic, pedantic type of effort, exploring or investigating, given workable parts of sound frequencies and other supplementary means of improving consciousness, we need a break. The break then has been just as so many humans. We have the hope and did have that there was other intelligent life, quote, out there. And so we began to look for it. And for many years we had no results whatsoever. It seemed a very sterile physical universe. And it was only until we began to change the belief system of not only our subjects, our participants, our explorers, but also we ourselves, the conductors, the monitors of such experiments, and things suddenly opened up for us. And then after that, it was a very, very busy universe.
You did find other life out there then?
Yes, very much so, but not in... there was no local intelligent life, such as on Mars or something like that.
Far beyond that?
Far beyond that. We did run into physical intelligent life. And
physical life like ours?
Yes, but not humanoid.
Okay.
If you ask me how these other intelligent physical beings were, it's very difficult, because we automatically assume that intelligence has to follow a humanoid form, and after you get over that, the classic case that we had was where one of our explorers encountered what seemed to be a large elephant, and that's the way he perceived it. And he was very wary and careful about this elephant because he was so small compared to it, when suddenly the elephant winked. And that changed the whole pattern.
A winking elephant might change anyone.
Yeah, well, it at least implied a consciousness that he certainly didn't think was there.
What kind of information was he able to find in dealing with the large thing that he perceived as an elephant? Well,
in that particular case, it was just a sort of a friendly interchange of ideas about the structure of the universe and the patterns of development, how it originated, this kind of thing. Was it really a Big Bang or what? And most of such physical beings did not know much more than we did in that respect. They had some insights that we did not, but for a cold turkey appraisal and say that the Big Bang Theory is what it is and it just happened, they were somewhat beyond us, let's say, in that. The real gold mine material began to occur, of course, when we began to encounter intelligent beings who had never been even human in any form before. And that's where it became fascinating.
Were they in the spiritual realm most of the time?
Well, you use the word spiritual, and we're not quite sure what you mean by that, you see.
Non-human or non-physical?
We call them other energy systems, which are non-physical and are beyond space-time, is the best way to put it. And we have found that this is far more common, such communication, than would ordinarily seem. It's evidently going on a much broader scale throughout the world. The fact that it's not reported doesn't have any meaning at all. It's, a lot of people, a lot of organizations either misinterpret it or are too conservative to report it for what it really is. And that's a nice way of going out on a limb, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Might as well get out there and just kind of sit on the edge of it a little bit.
As long as we don't saw it off.
Don't want to do that.
No.
But we certainly do want to open some minds to the fact that this is going on.
Yeah.
That we do have the ability to move outside of our physical selves, to take our conscious energy or our spirit, whatever you may want to call it.
Well, take, for example, the piece of information on how this is suddenly within the last 10 or 15 years, mushrooming to a very great degree. Our publishing people in New York say that they have received over 300 manuscripts within the last 2 years that deal with information gathered through so-called channeling sources and means similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there have been over 300 just in this publishing firm alone, and imagine what that might be on a larger scale.
On the out-of-body experience that everybody seems to be channeling these days, as well as going out-of-body.
Mm-hmm.
Picking up information that is really beyond the realm of their own consciousness to have, for the most part.
It's a very quiet, you're probably one of the few outlets that makes any public knowledge of it, but it is astounding the degree that this is taking place. We're only a very small fraction of such activity, and we're astounded every time we hear more about what's going on. You probably know more than we do at this stage.
Well, I hear some great stories, and I get a lot of letters and manuscripts or little manuscripts of our notations about what people have learned in this fashion. Some of it is quite beautiful. It generally is quite spiritual in one way or another. Looking toward this time that we are living in, which seems to be some sort of a crisis of some proportion, whether that's good or bad, but a great change is down the road for us here.
Apparently, that's one of the common threads that goes through so much of it that we have encountered anyway, that there is a very profound reason why this sudden surfacing of such communication. And it appears that there is some crisis pattern, and the information attached to it appears very much to be like the Chinese ideograph that for crisis, which has which pictures two symbols, and one is danger and the other is opportunity. And so we have begun to look upon it as that a message saying that here comes danger and here comes opportunity. What you going to do about it?
Mm-hmm. From what you're going to go through, life is going to be a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say it has the potential of doing that.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to turn that around.
Yeah.
In a moment, let's touch upon another of the interesting aspects of the out-of-body traveler, and your explorers certainly have found out that the time-space continuum is not exactly the way we think it is. That we can travel into the future and into the past in this particular state. And we're beginning to understand some of the science, the physics, and dynamics behind that, and we'll get to that with Robert Monroe in just a moment. I'm Bill Jenkins. It's Open Mind. Saturday night, it's Open Mind. My name is Bill Jenkins. My guest is Robert Monroe, Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences in Virginia. Bob is on the phone with us from Virginia tonight. His schedule had to be changed here in the last little bit where he didn't make it to our studio. But he got here not out of body, but over the telephone line. And, Robert, welcome back.
All right. Glad to be here.
We talked a little bit last time that your explorers found out that they could, in a piggyback fashion, go back into the past.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What have they found in the past, and have we got an accurate view of the past?
If you say an accurate view, a historical viewpoint is obviously very colored in its writing, because if you write about wars, who writes about who writes about wars and history is full of wars, for example, the winner writes about them.
Yes. Yeah, the loser doesn't want to write too much about it.
That's right. And so we found a number of small historical inaccuracies. One of the prime ones, of course, is that man's been around much longer than our historians or geologists, etc., seem to indicate. Now, whether this will be verified somewhere by our normal scientific methods, it'll be fun to find out.
How far back have your explorers found man to be?
Oh, I think it's about 11 or 12 million years.
That man has been walking Earth for 11 to 12 million years.
That's what it seems to be.
Was he an ape before he was a man, or?
It's sort of an interesting, and we do a lot of cross-referencing, incidentally, where we try to find out past data by using cellular exploration, i.e., that one explorer will carry out a given test or a given approach to something totally independent of another one who will perform the same thing and they before. And we go back and try to find out the perspectives, bearing very much in mind that each one will be somewhat colored or contaminated by their own personality or their environmental heredity again. So we will try to find out a basis of something utilizing each one uncontaminated by the other. Very difficult to do this, but we have had some success with it. Man's origin is one of the most fascinating ones, of course. And one of the consensus that we do have is that man's truly basic origin came somehow, as is pictured, between land and sea. And that means not in the jungle or not in the water, but apparently in that strip of land area that we would call a beach or near the water. And that's where he seems to have originated, that he began to grow and become independent of other species. And it's most interesting that it's problematical he did not originate out of a sea creature, and that's the other part. He originated out of some land creature. Now, that modification was in itself very dramatic and very instantaneous if you think of archaeological history.
Sudden.
Yes, sudden.
I know Dr. Crick and Dr. Goodman and some of the others call it an intervention.
Yeah, it appears to be that, and some of the aspects of that, that quickness would be quite satisfactory to the religionists, I suppose. You got to remember that we sometimes are criticized because we are, quote, not more spiritual in our investigation of such things. But we're sort of a bridge between conventional science and the unorthodox areas. And we take a position that, well, let's not call it the intervention of God yet. Let's see what that intervention was, for example. Let's don't automatically jump to such a conclusion.
Well, some will conclude it was the intervention of the Creator. Others will conclude that it was the intervention of a very advanced group of human beings. That's
what I mean. And there are a number of possibilities other than a divine source as such. And but we do get a consensus that there was, quote, an intervention of some kind.
That in a geological twinkling,
yes,
totally altered the normal evolutionary track.
That's the understanding that we have
of the indigenous primates that were here. Have your explorers found any evidence of any great cultures such as Atlantis or Lemuria or any of those things that we hear so much about?
To some degree, yes. And one of the most fascinating parts that has surfaced is that the two common ones that seem mythological namely Lemuria and Atlantis, in themselves, without any means of supporting data other than that consensus, we have had 6 or 7 reports that these did indeed exist. And the most interesting part that I liked that came up in that too was that they did not sink beneath the seas, as it were. The seas came up and overwhelmed them. How do you like that?
I've heard that before.
Well, I say it's quite interesting.
The melting of the polar caps, during the Ice Age could have raised the sea level 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet.
Yeah, and they were coastal civilizations. And as a result, that's where they are. They were not overwhelmed by earthquakes and things like that. Which would also infer that they are, quote, somewhere around not too far away, meaning below the surface.
Well, Charles Berlitz thinks that there's quite a thriving, not thriving, but certainly a lot of remains of the Atlantean community. That very strange things happen out in the Atlantic Ocean that he has witnessed himself in his explorations, and he detailed those very graphically in his book Atlantis. You know, why he was drawn to Atlantis was because of his grandfather. Who pointed out, he asked his grandfather of the Berlitz School of Language, who started that, where did the language come from? And he said it all came from Atlantis. And he gave him a lot of different words that were the same, basically, on all the, in the United States and South America and Africa and Europe, as if they all had the same common root. But back in those ancient times, supposedly there was no way they could get together.
It's most fascinating. The whole exploration of the past, we have not spent a great deal on it. Once in a while it stimulated our interest, and we would get into it, but not to the degree that we would go out and try to verify in great depth some of the things that have indeed surfaced.
What about moving into the future?
Well, that is, of course, a prime curiosity to most people of what's the future. And we have come into one thing, and again, I'd try to deal with consensus because it's better for us to do that. We can live with it a lot better. And one of the problems that we found is that we put value judgments on what we might uncover, and or what we might approach at some period in the future. But without much hesitation, I guess is the best word, and yet I still hesitate. This crisis point in the near future seems very, very valid. The question is what it is,
Well, let's talk about that little flash point that's coming up in the future after we take this little break for our news at 10 o'clock here on KABC. With me is Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe, the author of Journeys Out of Body and his new book, Far Journeys, which is a fascinating recounting of some of the things that the explorers have found out that work with the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences as they explore, do research and development in the fascinating world that is to be found out of body. And as we left Bob here right before the news, we were talking about the ability of these explorers to reach into the past or to go into the past. Do they literally go into the past and view it as a spectator, or are they a part of it, or how does that function work, Don?
Well, interestingly enough, I think the best way to describe it is to describe one event in that.
Okay.
Usually the most common way to let a person move out, and if you think of our symbology, they go out of body and move into what would be the center of a wheel, the hub of a wheel. And the time exists on the circumference or the rim of that wheel. And let's say they would go to that hub in 1985, in November of 85, and then they would rotate. And we have it seems to work, and why it works, we don't have an answer. We rotate counterclockwise to go back into the past, and then one comes out of that hub of the wheel and moves back out to the rim in the past. The best way to locate a position in the past is to go back say, to when one was 2 years old. You, the individual, you, the explorer. And when you do that, you don't go back and become that person, that 2-year-old that you were, but you piggyback that person. In other words, you become an observer in the scene. Now, we've had a lot of discussion about participating in the scene, but you can observe it, and you can observe yourself, and that's the start point of how to begin to do this, is to go observe yourself in the role as a 2-year-old or even younger. And we go back to such an early age because your conscious memory is certainly not the interfering portion that would bring all of this up. And then from that, having identified and been able to go back to a personal point in the past, then you can roll beyond that. But that's the training method. And we've had many questions about what would, if one did participate in such a scene in the past, would that indeed affect the future? I must tell you quite candidly that we are not, and being very much of neophytes in the whole process, comparatively speaking, have not made any attempt to interfere with the past.
Would you have an ability to participate in a scene if you were going back and watching yourself, let's say, as a 2-year-old?
It would seem that we would. We have used the perfect illustration, for example, that if you went back in the past and you, let's say that you knew that as a 6-year-old you had found a snake and it frightened your little 2-year-old sister with a snake, so that as she grew up, that she had this unconscionable fear of snakes. And as a result, she became neurotic or psychotic as a result of this episode of as a 2-year-old. Suppose you went back and interfered with that, and then interfered with you as a 6-year-old performing that snake-teasing function. What would happen then? As best as we can understand it, it would echo all the way back into the present if one did this. Nice, interesting idea, isn't it?
It is an interesting idea, but what is bothering me about that is that if you're in the out-of-body state as you go back into the past and view yourself who is in body, how could you interrelate from the non-physical to the physical world?
That, of course, is one of the problems. To bear in mind that in the past, that if you get into an environment where there are living persons, they are living and they are in body at that time, so that you can affect them while they are in body. You can't affect their body directly, for example, but you can get in touch with, and I'll put it that way, or affect somehow that living mechanism that inhabits that body, albeit temporarily.
Their consciousness.
Yes.
You can communicate with their consciousness.
Yes, that's right.
We could really do a lot of mischief that way, couldn't we?
Yes, and I'm not sure. Well, someone should probably get in and try this, but we just simply haven't had either the time or the courage to do so. I don't know which it is.
I can think of some people in history that it might have been a good idea to interfere with along the way.
I can too, but you see, then we're putting value judgments on things. And who are we? Are we smart enough, even in supreme hindsight, to know that that's what it is? Maybe our view isn't long enough yet, you see. A short view would say, let's go back and change this. But
you don't know what kind of changes you would have wrought then, do you?
That is true, because we're not far enough away from it. And we're also judging whether that is a constructive or destructive event. Hard to say.
Have your explorers witnessed then any momentous times in history? Like the building of the pyramids, one of the questions put to me here by some of the people that are here listening to you.
Bill, we haven't done that. That's an interesting idea, but we did get one part of it that was most interesting. Would you like to hear that part of it?
Of course.
One of the very few times we've gotten involved with the whole concept of pyramids. We took a look at it from how they were built and went back to see how it was built. Most interesting way. As near as we could get what happened, because this question is how did this how were these pyramids built and all the heavy blocks that were moved. One of the things that seems to have been verified, that the way the pyramids were built was that they flooded the area where the pyramid was to be built. And then from this distant quarry, floated the blocks along and put them in place on huge rafts. And then as the pyramid was built, they raised the waters, the flood waters, or the damming up of the waters that went in around the pyramid. And then that allowed them to get the next layer of blocks in. So finally, they got the blocks moving in by, as they say, on huge rafts. And that was the means that they, in their culture, were able to transport these huge blocks that made up the pyramid. Interesting idea. And that's the way, that was the report that we had in I think about the only time that we really did try to find out how the pyramids came into being.
I think it's quite interesting in that we can't build a barge that would hold one of those stones.
Well,
I'd be interested to see the rafts that they were using.
Yeah, that we did purportedly was quite large.
They would sink the Enterprise.
But it was interesting in that, as I understand, we looked at it from a very practical point of view, and evidently, if that area were dammed up, that it would be possible that such rafts could have floated.
I think there are three ranges of mountains that they have to between the pyramids and the quarry.
Whether they came around them or not, and I was not a party to finding out if this were possible. But my understanding was that there was a way that they could have been floated in. But that was the picture of these being floated in somehow on water.
Well, that's certainly ingenious.
Well, that was kind of interesting. Everybody made a lot of presumptions that there was an energy force being used that nobody knew about and everything else, but a very simple one. Rafts floating the rocks in.
They had to be dandy rafts.
They indeed did.
In the future, you say you have peeked in the future, your explorers have. And we're moving into an enormously interesting time.
Yes. Let's take one thing that we found in attempting to go downstream, as it were, into the future. And that is that our ability to understand what we perceive becomes more vague the more we go downstream. For example, if you took, let's say, what would be called scientists 300 or 400 years ago and had them come into present-day technology, they would have great difficulty understanding our microelectronics, our whole theories involving electromagnetism, or never mind metallurgy. And if you think of that, then you can see how, and we have some pretty good people doing this, and how they have difficulty perceiving 100 years into the future, and only 100 years.
They have been there.
Yeah.
And they find it mind-boggling?
Well, it's a sense of bewilderment. We have a physicist who is very accomplished, has been very accomplished in the field. We have a very good electronics engineer. And you dump him 100 years into the future, and he's vague. If you put him into 500 years, he's a monkey coming down out of the trees.
Probably 10 years from now they'll feel that way. with some of the things that are crossing the threshold even as we speak.
Yes, and one of the on one of my two desks that I have sits a little replica of a statue, and I don't know who did it or not, but this is kind of an interesting reminder of, and there's one to ponder. It's one of a monkey sitting on a haphazard pile of books, and he's got his hand on his chin, and he's staring at a human skull, and trying to say, well, what was that? And has no idea that he's sitting on a pile of human books called Darwin and so on.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen the statue, but it's most interesting. And
well, a monkey sitting on a pile of haphazard books looks like my office.
It looks like mine, too, to say the
Me
truth.
being the monkey. What are some of the wonders that are dazzling the physicist that they see?
And we're dealing, evidently, we also understand from our multiple approach to it, that we're dealing with possibilities becoming probabilities. So the more we deal in close time, we're dealing with probabilities. The farther we get downstream, we, as is very customary, as not original with us, we're dealing only with possibilities. And some of those possibilities that may become probabilities are most interesting, and they all hinge around what man does with his consciousness, and obviously we're most interested in that. And it does appear that a major possibility is that the human species and the consciousness attached thereto may become something far more than he is now, and where he does not. And we're talking in a near time frame, and we're talking near time less than 500 years, where he has, through a series of, I'll call them crises, becomes much more than he is now, and he does not need the physical support systems that he uses now. And he's able to do many, many things solely with his consciousness that he has to have tools to do and use now to achieve the same thing.
You know, that's quite interesting to hear that, because that has been a subject that we have touched upon on this program from time to time as we deal into the rather advanced sciences that you will not find in your science books, but nevertheless are being worked with in the laboratory.
Yes.
That as we move into this new realm of physics and electromagnetics, that the function of the new physics and the new electromagnetics has a great deal to do with the function of the mind of the operator.
Very much so.
There is an enormous link between them. The new bioenergetics devices absolutely require a mental link before they will work, and then they will work magnificently.
And this is what begins to excite us, because we feel that we're, and I say only a small part, of the training procedure that is involved in those bioenergetic type of approaches to operating systems. And that's where it gets real exciting to see it happen. Not such mundane things as, let's call it psychokinesis. It's much simpler.
That's just playing with your toes, isn't it?
That's what I mean. And it does get exciting where you are using an energy that apparently you have already. It's only a matter of directing it.
Beginning to understand the physics and dynamics of that energy that we have.
That is correct.
And it all has to do with that hemisync that you're talking about, the left and right hemisphere of the brain.
And when you see, where you see a brainwave pattern where, as we do in the laboratory, of an amplitude, which is another way of saying of a volume of some of these narrow-banded frequencies that we use, that's where it gets exciting. And we say, well, fine, if that will do that and that frequency will do that, what would a pair of different high-amplitude frequencies do? And how do we continue to generate them? And most importantly, how do we help the human mind generate them all of their own? You see?
Well, we've talked about quite often here how the left and right hemispheres of the brains actually function as a very efficient scalar interferometer.
Yes.
And with that kind of energy now being produced, which you can at will, you can do exactly what Jesus said. You can move mountains.
That appears to be so. It's only a matter of learning how to focus your attention.
Well, there are a lot of people lined up here to talk to you, Bob. You ready to talk to them a little bit?
Well, we can try.
We can give it a shot, all right?
Let me have a sip of coffee first.
All right, have a sip of coffee. We'll take a little bit of break.
All right.
We're talking to Robert Monroe, and his new book is called Far Journeys, and he details some of the journeys that the explorers at the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences have taken into the past and into the future and into worlds beyond, and have done this in a very carefully controlled scientific fashion. There's no mysticism involved. It's a matter of very serious research and development. And you have a chance to talk to him. Let me give you the numbers again. They all end in talk. And Eric is on the line. Eric, welcome aboard.
Well, thank you very much. I want to tell you how much I enjoy your... I'm getting a strange sound in my phone, are you?
Yeah, you're sounding like you're coming from some out-of-body state.
Yes, well, not as far as I'm aware. I wanted to, first of all, say that the first times I ever heard your program, I heard Dr. Serge King. Who was actually a replacement for somebody who was supposed to be talking about crystals and wasn't able to get there.
Right.
And I have just had my first class in Dr. King's Advanced Shamanism class.
There you go.
Course. So you can see that I've been working with him for a while, and it's been a marvelous experience.
Well, you're working with a master there, so...
Yes, I have that same impression.
One of the fine kahunas.
My questions... first of all, are in regard to dreams, in the sense that I have great difficulty remembering my dreams. And I was wondering if there was if there were any comments about this, or anything I could do in the way of using the tapes or anything of that kind.
Robert?
First, you have to get into the question of the desire or need to remember your dreams. Why do you want to do this?
Well, it's my impression that our dreams often are clues to us or have information for us. And I seem to be kind of cut off from that at this point.
I see. Well, one of the most common means of trying to remember dreams lies in a lot of the research that dream labs are doing in lucid dreams, which you might be aware of.
Yes.
And the way to do that, first of all, is they have a thing, is to go, as you go to sleep, say you will remember your dream. And that's a very common way of saying it, and I see nothing that will help any better, primarily, if you are talking in terms of simply remembering dreams. Another way, of course, is to go to sleep at a given time and set an alarm that'll wake you up about an hour and 20 minutes later. And very often, if you practice...
Okay. And then is to ask... I've heard that some of the research that's being done or being attempted in relation to whales and dolphins as conscious beings is made more difficult because of the difference in brain structure between dolphins and human beings. To say nothing of other differences such as the fact that a lot of the sounds that they make we can't hear and things of that sort.
I think they're smarter than we are.
No, they do. And I was wondering if the people, the researchers that you are working with, adventurers, is that the phrase?
I have no direct information regarding that. We haven't been in touch with any people recently who were working with dolphins and or whales in that area. The last one was John Lilly, and I haven't talked with John for 5 years, so I don't know what he's been doing.
Oh, I see.
Well, Eric, I tell you
help you.
Next week, Dr. Patrick Flanagan will be our guest, and Patrick is the one that taught the dolphins to do the things for the Navy that they do.
Oh.
So he can answer some of those questions.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
All right?
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us, Eric. And Dennis was squealing at us pretty loudly there. Shall we try again? Have Dennis turn off his radio there, if he would.
That's what it is, yeah.
Sounds to me. Okay. Dennis is not going to do it. So we'll go to James. You're doing the same thing. Oh, it's in our system. Wasn't Dennis's fault, or it wasn't James's fault. So while we correct our system, we'll just continue going on with the wild and wonderful world that the explorers are finding out. One of the explorers ran across a very interesting lady who was trying to show her a rather large building. What was the outcome of that? I didn't get a chance to finish that story.
Oh, well, I don't think I included it in Far Journeys. The interesting part of the sequel to that, where this lady, female, I'll put it that way, a very attractive female, lured our physicist in. Lured is not quite the word, but he encountered her, and she took him to show him around in her part of a non-physical or another universe system, and then handed him off, as it were, to another person who was a male. And there the conversation developed finally after several encounters. Final part of the encounter was quite interesting after having great difficulty in learning their technology, or beginning to even, that it was finally discovered that our physicist, being a male, was deliberately lured there by this female because they got the signal that that's the only way they could get him. It was luring there by a female.
Oh, really?
Which we thought was a lot of fun.
Did he learn anything?
With great difficulty. However, that particular system agreed that they would attempt to teach him the fundamentals of their technology or their sciences. But it became an excruciatingly difficult process and encompassed so much time that we were unable to get it down to any degree of commonality, I guess the best word is.
Just beyond his
it was beyond his, and he was and is a tremendously talented person intellectually, and he still could not get a satisfactory base on which he could understand it.
Well, maybe we have cleared up our system here. We'll try talking to James. James, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Is this clear enough for you?
Well, now it seems to be working.
Okay. Mr. Monroe and Mr. Jenkins. First of all, keeping in mind that the name of the show is Open Mind, let me tell you what makes a skeptic, and then let me tell you why I'm skeptical about out-of-body. About 18 months ago, you talked about free energy devices, and you said that within a year we'd have them and we could unhook our energy supplies from utilities. You talked about crystals, and I went out and I got a crystal and I put it in my refrigerator. All I have is a cold crystal. You talked about firewalking, and subsequently I saw a demonstration by people who were totally untrained, and they just demonstrated that it's possible to do this. There's nothing mysterious about it. And now I hear Mr. Monroe talking about out-of-body, and he talks about going to other planets and going back in time and forward in time. If this is really possible, why not do a demonstration in real time? I mean, why doesn't he have one of his explorers come to your studio and, describe things or do make some kind of concrete demonstration? All I hear is...
That indeed was what we were planning on doing, but we were not able to do it.
Well, all I hear is abstractions. And I think if you want... I mean, I may be a skeptic, but I think if you want to convince anybody that any of this is possible, why are all of these feats that can't be... there's no evidence for done? Why can't we do something more concrete?
That's a very interesting question. I can give you a very immediate and very early response as far as we're concerned. We're not in the process of proving it to the world at large, and that may be selfish because we are simply basically finding out for our own edification. We get pushed into corners now and then to say, well, what are you doing? But that's not our stance, is to make a massive public demonstration of it. There are others who might want to do this, but this hasn't been our role. That's the fastest and easiest answer. So we are not attempting to really prove it to anyone else. We can give the tools and say that these tools are available for an individual to find out for himself if he so wishes. But massive and I say, Bill Jenkins is, I consider, a friend, and we get on and chat in here, but it is not to prove the validity or the non-validity of the out-of-body state. There are studies that have gone ahead and have indicated, for example, that on a worldwide base, some 25% of the world population has had at least one spontaneous out-of-body experience they can remember.
But how do we know these aren't just hallucinations or dreams? I mean, if you could give some concrete evidence to people,
well, the question always is what would you consider concrete evidence? You see?
Well, okay. For example, if it is possible to move out of the body and cross state lines, at the speed of light, which it must be possible to go to other planets and come back in a lifetime.
Yes.
Why not have somebody go from Louisiana to Los Angeles and describe things in a room?
We have done that. We have done that any number of times.
Well,
we've done better than that, but as a matter of fact.
Then why don't we talk about that? Because you're talking about a lot of abstractions about things that people really can't relate with, about winking elephants and...
Well, you see, we've gotten to that stage in our talk.
Right. Well, then I'd like to hear, for one, I'd like to hear some of the concrete things that have been done that can be documented.
Well, it depends on what you mean by documentation. If you say, you see, there's many conflicting things. For example, one can be a remote viewer, as it were, which is a current phrase for, let's say, clairvoyance in the old-fashioned way. And a remote viewer can from a distance, perceive activities at a given site or a given target location, and can report very accurately what the activities there or what is there at that location. But that's not the out-of-body state. So the criteria for, let's call it, proof is very difficult because you're dealing with something of which you have no way of measuring, and that's one of the great problems. It's true.
Am I incorrect in my supposition that an out-of-body state can be in real time, that someone could leave their body and go to a location that's maybe 30 or 40 or 200 miles away and come back and report things?
Oh, very much so, yes. We did much of that 15 years ago, let's say. 10 to 15 years ago, we did a lot of that type of work. We have not done it recently.
Bill, do you understand what I'm talking about?
I hear what you're doing. Hear what you're saying, and Bob's being rather specific. They have done that. They have done that over and over again, and they have moved on to other realms of investigating this particular phenomenon, which has a great deal more impact upon what we're going to learn, other than just playing with it and saying, "Here, I'm going to run over to Arizona at some place in Phoenix, tell you what's happening, come back, and look what I've done." Of what great value is that?
Well, he says, though, that he doesn't want to, he doesn't see any point in grandstanding and showing this to the public in general. But if this is truly a valid, useful thing for people to do, I would think that would be probably one of the first steps he would want to take, is get the public.
He did 15 years ago.
We did this, and we are looking for exactly what you're speaking of, something of value. We could not perceive any great value in going from Virginia to Los Angeles to San Francisco just to go and read some numbers in a room, for example, or observe what's taking place there. How many times do you have to do this before you're satisfied to the accuracy of something like that? What do you do beyond that, where it becomes something of value, something that will indeed perform function?
It would be tremendous. You could do away with telephones for one thing.
Well,
I know he did it 15 years ago.
But okay, then why are we talking on the telephone?
Because it's not that easy to do. For example, the best parallel I can give you is that to become a very accomplished violinist, for example, it takes years of practice. If you're going to be a gymnast, it takes years of exercise, practice, and study to do these kinds of things. Most people are unwilling to do that, very frankly. But if one is willing to do that, and I will not back away from that statement, if one is willing to dedicate so many hours each day for about 2 years, they could become tremendously proficient in this field.
Well, I I still remain a skeptic. And
no, sir, this is the answer to a skeptic, if indeed you are willing to do that.
Well, I think before you can get someone who's a skeptic to donate 2 years of his life, you have to do something a little bit more concrete than what I hear.
Well,
I hear something happened 15 years ago, but I mean.
What's the difference in it happening 15 years ago or 10 minutes ago?
Well, if there was some demonstration to me that it happened, I mean, rather than saying that it happened, that's the difference.
Those tools, the methods of doing that in a very simple demonstration are available to you through a number of different ways. If you are interested enough to take the time to do something like that, those systems, those methods are available.
Yeah, they have the gateway programs that are conducted here in Los Angeles quite often.
But you see, you don't even need to do that. There are other ways of doing it, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, this is very good and a very valid point. Prove it to me. Why? Let them prove it to themselves, and that's the only way you can do it.
Well, Mr. Monroe, I'm not trying to be critical of you. I'm just trying to. I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel the way I do, and I think that there's probably some frustration in listening to the conversation because it seems to be a lot of abstractions. And
you know how I can empathize with that? If you had asked me 25 years ago, I would have had exactly the same position that you have. In other words, my position 25 years ago would be precisely what you're saying. Without any...
What was it that convinced you to donate so much of your life to this? I mean, who opened your eyes, or what demonstration, or what happened?
Well, what happened in a very simple form all the way back in 1958. This started happening with me. And it was a thing that I had to do something about it because it was sort of a wild talent developing in a very ordinary life. And not finding any other answers, I had to go in turn and set out some type of form of research to see what could be what this is. And it took me at least a full year to accept the reality of it. And that was, let's say, at least 100 such episodes in 1 year. And during that whole year, my skepticism was exactly where yours is.
Well,
and I could not accept it until the very thing that you talk about took place, namely that I encountered means of being able to prove it. And once I did that, or that took place is a better word, that changed me completely, as it would you. That proved it.
I'll call back when I experience this.
Well, or find out a way to do it.
But I'm not at the point where I want to donate 2 years of my life.
If you find out a way, James, let me know, because I have been able to do it myself.
I empathize with you, Bill.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Bye.
There's something very healthy about skepticism all along.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. This is a vital part of what? Skepticism. Open skepticism. Open skepticism.
Well, they certainly, the skeptics enjoy this show because we give them a lot of fodder to think about.
You do.
Okay. Let's go to Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Uh-huh.
Yes. I somewhat can empathize with that young man, except for the fact that everyone who I've met and everyone who I've heard on your show, Bill, has said over and over again that the awareness that you need for true perception in all of these areas takes time to develop. And I think Mr. Monroe was also speaking about that. And I myself am a student of metaphysics, and I'm, a relative beginner, although I've been at it for a couple of years now. And I have a question regarding the out-of-body experience. I, of course, was delighted when reading in Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb about her experience in the spring in the high mountains of Peru. And I myself have not had any physical environment even close to that, but I'm wondering if an out-of-body experience, does it need to be stimulated physically by an environment that is not your ordinary environment? For instance, would an isolation tank be a way to experience out-of-body, as experiments have been done all over the world with isolation tanks, and of course the graphic commercial revelation about it, of course, was in altered states. A fictionalized account, and maybe not so fictionalized.
But is that one way to go, or is that totally unnecessary to have like a physical stimulation to go out of body?
The first and foremost clue, and an isolation environment does help that, is to shut off your physical sensory input as much as you can. This begins to isolate you to the point where you recognize, one, I'm awake and I'm conscious without this heavy input from the five physical senses. This is a landmark, a milestone that you pass, where you realize you don't need this sensory input to be conscious. And whatever will help do that. And we do indeed use an isolation booth in our laboratory. We have different types of non-stimulants and stimulating environments that we use within it. But the prime one is that we do shut off sight and sound and the sense of touch as much as possible. So
you use a Faraday cage also, don't you?
Yes, that's right. And we do shut off a lot of the EM radiation that may well be reaching the ordinary human. But any type of sensory deprivation can indeed help. But you have to get acclimated to that.
From your experiments with your explorers, have you found out that if that is the starting point, that after a while these people are able to, go into a meditation or whatever it takes and do it without the, in other words, can you acclimate yourself so that you can go out of body without the sensory deprivation?
Oh, yes. We have a tool that we've been using for a good 10 years now, which is a sound inducing system that we call a hemisync, which is a synchronization of the brain hemispheres. But that is a learning thing that one learns much like biofeedback, so that they can, a participant can recreate that state, no matter what his environment, whether it's outside of the isolation booth and outside of what we call our check units, which is a controlled ballistic environmental chamber, and can do it, as it were, even in an airport, sitting in a chair in an airport. And that, though, is a matter of training very, very similar to how one learns to alter your physical mechanism by, say, biofeedback. It's a learned procedure. And once having learned that you don't need this, the training wheels, as it were, either the methods that we use or the isolation.
Are some of these methods that you're describing designated in your new book?
Yes, very much, to a very definite degree. Some of the most important parts of it are related in the book.
Terrific. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
All right. You'll find a lot of fun in it.
I had one other question. I have a very good memory. Not that I have trained myself to use it. I should qualify that. I have a memory. My memory to go back into the past is very good. I'm very bad with names and that kind of thing. But as far as my own life goes, I can go back, and I can go back to when I was a year old and even younger than that, to very specific days and times of that period of my life, and I can recall, I can recall the smell of our yard and the smell of my dog, for instance. The olfactory sense was so vivid, and the smell of our house. We lived in a flat, and my grandmother lived downstairs, and we lived upstairs, and each house had its own. Anyway, I'm wondering that with that kind of a memory...
You have a very great opportunity, and you ought to use it.
I was just going to ask you that. Is that going to be a help to get back, to go back, in other words, either into a past life regression and or an out-of-body experience?
All right. There are two ways you can use that recall system. One, follow the path you've already started, and that is deliberately keep working backwards till you get down to your actual physical birth. And if you can go back to 1 year and under, then you should be able to do this. And do it very deliberately. And then go back into a pre-birth state and see what happens.
Right.
I assure you, if you have that kind of recall control, you won't get in any trouble or anything like that. It'll be a very fascinating thing.
And you can't take a notepad with you, so it's good to have the memory.
Are the two related? I mean, is there a relationship between going out of body and going into a regressive state?
Not necessarily, no. But
okay.
it always is a system of memory. For example, we take the position right now that you meaning all of us, go out of body during sleep at night. For a number of reasons that are not all totally apparent at the moment. So if you got that kind of memory, all you have to do is to begin to remember what you do in deep delta sleep, your deepest sleep at night. And if you remember that, you'll remember the out-of-body state.
And is that something that can be helped by this, what you mentioned about going in an hour and 20 minutes with an alarm to remember? Because that is something I don't do very well, is remember my dreams. My wife is...
The alarm system can work very well that way. Only if you want to really find the out-of-body state instead of dreams. I was talking dreams.
Oh, that was dreams, right.
That was dreams. But you can do the same thing with an alarm system. Simple, and try to make it as gentle as you can.
I have an alarm system that's about to go off here, gentlemen.
Well, thank you so much.
Right.
I'm looking forward to your book.
All right, Jim.
In the middle of your sleep. Right in the middle of your sleep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your call, Jim. I'm Bill Jenkins. With me, Bob, or Leona.
Fiona.
Fiona. How are you, Fiona?
I'm fine. First of all, I love your programs, Bill.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say for the healthy skeptic about the crystal, I wonder if he got a cluster of crystals put in his refrigerator or just a plain crystal, because it makes a difference.
I don't know. I have one about the size of my thumb in mine, and it makes a big difference.
I was told that you have to use the clusters, not just the one crystal, and I was told that by the crystal people in the valley.
Yeah, okay.
So just to let him know.
All right. What's on your mind, hon?
No, nothing, really. I just heard him talking, and that was about it.
Oh, that's it.
I just listen happily to everything that you have on.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, Florence, you're on.
Hello, Bill. This is very interesting. Have you gotten into healing with your work?
In the out-of-body state?
Yes. Have any of your people... I have experiences such as this, and was taken into a vast area of light, and it seems to be extremely healing. I bring it into my body, and I have kind of quantum leaps, and then I get scared, and I have to wait and let my intellect catch up.
I don't know. What have you found about healing of the explorers, Bob?
Well, that's very interesting, and the kind of scared thing is the most important part that you, and that is the inhibitor. All I can say is that ordinarily, and I say that I cannot think of an exception. Our explorers, quote, make friends with a non-physical being. I'll put that word in whatever.
Oh, yeah. I've seen them.
And the prime rule or basis of that association is the well-being of the explorer. And they do indeed perform various functions to help that explorer be healthy, and including healing some very spectacular things.
Yeah, like a guide. And then...
Yes, but their association does produce some most spectacular healing processes. We've observed...
Well, let's pick that up, Bob, whenever we get back. There's our music. We're going to take a break for explorers, those who are working under laboratory conditions there, very controlled situations. When they run into other entities on the other side, there's quite a great deal of concern about their well-being, and that there has been some healing done with them in the out-of-body state that's translated then into their physical life. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. I immediately qualify and say that not on just a very casual contact, but where such communication, or I say association, whatever you want to call it, is on an ongoing basis. The prime concern of that non-physical being is the health and I would say happiness too of that particular explorer. This translates itself into very practical solutions, as it were, for any dysfunction of that human explorer, to the point of utilizing what to us, and we neglected it for a long time, a very astounding technology in such healing procedures. And when we were so dazzled by the information that we received that we neglected that thing and the results or evidence supporting it for so long a time. But some very basic things where one of our explorers, for example, had very specific diagnosis for an illness that required hospitalization or surgery. And they would be treated, as it were, by their friendly, non-physical being, and then no longer required it, and the physiological data supported that healing or that lack of a need for treatment. Most fascinating that this has occurred at least 8 or 9 times during the last 5 or 6 years.
So a healing process would be undertaken in the out-of-body state.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And that would be translated when they got back in body.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That had great impact upon the physical body.
Or in other specific cases where this treatment would take place while they were upon the body, while our explorer was not in the body, very deliberately taken out so the treatment could take place.
That is fascinating. Maybe one of these days in the not-too-distant future, Bob, the hospitals will all be on the astral level.
Who can tell? It's a very strange phenomenon, and we must confess that even we have considerable physiological data as to what is happening in the body. In other words, changes in temperature, changes in body voltage, and that kind of thing, to indicate something is taking place, but exactly what it is, we do not know.
But there is a dramatic change in the physiology of the traveler.
Yes, even the blood chemistry, we've been able to pick up some changes in that as a result of one of these, quote, treatments, as it were.
So, but it's necessary to have that encounter with this intelligence on the other side.
It's done externally by that. I mean, by an external source, as far as we can determine. We can only classify it as an external source that does perform this function, and the methodology employed is totally beyond our comprehension.
If that word gets out, you may have a lot of people lining up there at the Institute.
Well, we are not in that business, as it were. This is just a thing that happens within our laboratory facility.
Okay, fascinating stuff, Bob. Paul, you're on.
Hello?
Yeah, Paul, go.
Yes. 2 things. Many things. I wanted to thank you, Bill, for the show entirely. I've just been listening for several years, and I appreciate very much having this stuff go on.
Well, I appreciate you're listening and enjoying.
Well, this is just a wonderful. And also, I wanted to ask Robert if I would be able to get more out-of-body experience from him, or perhaps even from some of the other callers this evening that have had personal things. There might be just something for contact.
We have, are you speaking of information? Is that what you're looking for?
Well, yes, because I've learned some things about how to remember my dreams better.
Yes.
But I haven't gotten to the out-of-body yet.
Well, in your own out-of-body. Is that what you mean?
Well, yes.
Don't feel like a Lone Ranger.
Well, as I say, if you take the assumption and of an out-of-body state, go to sleep with some systems, wake-up systems, where you are awakened, say, about 40 minutes into the time that you go to sleep. Mm-hmm. You will have, quite possibly, if you do this several times and adjust the timing of it to conform to what you do, you can probably find out much about what you are doing in that out-of-body state during sleep. Some of our people have been testing it with some very interesting results.
This is
That'll give you your own personal information about it.
Well, this is a good idea, and then perhaps just my experience might be helpful to, well, say Eric.
Definitely.
This thing of recalling the dreams very much, and it's something that I learned a couple of years ago, and it's to, well, first, as you said, well, exactly as you said, when I go to bed to just say that I will remember my dreams. This will be a beginning. And then also I would keep a pencil and paper next to the bed.
Very important.
Right. And then immediately upon awakening, I'd write down the story of the dream in reverse order, because I could remember the most recent thing easily, and then the step before it, rather than try and go all the way back 3 or 4 hours.
Absolutely. That's indeed the best way, because it's sort of like an unraveling. The last one will lead you to the one preceding that. You're very right.
And just, well, that's it. To take it in small steps.
Yes.
Like that, in reverse order.
Very much so.
And then after I just write down it like an outline, I could go back and fill in more details of the story, and it just, because I can remember this first step or two, then the ones before that will come to my recall. And it's helpful just to do it for a time, because it's, well, like as much as we exercise our muscles, that over time it builds up. And I have found that in recent time it has come so very, very often I can remember the story of my dreams quite well, and even that's something because I'll go down to the library and get one of these dream interpretation dictionaries and find that I'll look at my notes and see the dream interpretation of these things, and then I can figure out what the story was. These people who are 5 years and 5,000 miles apart, but in my dream they're just a mixture together. And then when I look at this, well, as much as we have just an outline of a story,
well,
it comes to me.
There's a more sophisticated way, and I say sophisticated in a very loose term, that you can try this, and it works even better than the writing down procedure. Get yourself a little voice-activated cassette recorder. They're not that expensive. And all you have to do is talk, and it'll record. And you can do this in darkness. You don't need to turn on the light or whatever to write. Don't need to pick up the pen. All you do is turn over slightly in bed and start talking. And it works very, very well.
I see.
And you will have a much more coherent recording or reporting rather of your dream state or your out of body state, because then you can verbalize it as against having to laboriously write it down.
Well, that's it, because I'll be able to just do it faster.
That's right.
Then
before it gets buried under your left brain consciousness, you see.
Well, that's it. I have outside distractions that are going to come along one way or another.
That's right.
I can see me doing that, and my wife telling me to shut up.
That's what you have wives for.
All right, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you sharing that with us. And we have Larry on the line. Hello, Larry.
Hi, Bill. It's nice to get to talk to you. This is an unusual program, as I don't hear you that often, and I just happen to be listening tonight. But
where have you been?
I hear you, but I just don't get you every night. But I have never called the station before. But when you mentioned this out-of-body thing, it happened to me, but I just figured out. I was telling who answered the phone, it's about 1952. And I had 2 children at the time. They were small, and my wife had gone to the movies. And a neighbor had given me a book on yoga, and I was talking about skeptic. I've been one all my life. And I started reading this stuff, and I was getting into the meditation part, and I was sitting in a chair there in the living room reading this book, and it says then to close your eyes, and I was doing all that. And all of a sudden, I was up by the roof of the ceiling, not outside of the house, but I could feel the heat. It was in November and they had the heater on. I could feel the heat up the roof, and I could look down and see myself. And I was so, my reaction was that I was frightened. And the next thing I knew, I was sitting back in the chair again. I said, God, this is weird, because what they described in this book I was reading, I didn't expect it to be like this. Now, I don't know what Mr. Monroe would say if this is a normal way that this thing occurs, but at that time, back in the 50s, if you talk to anybody about like that, it's like flying saucers. And
what's the matter with flying saucers?
Normally, back in 52, they'd lock you up. So, that's why I say I didn't tell anybody. Never have told my wife. I told my daughter here about 5 years ago, and she still looks at me like I was a little bit.
You just now told everybody.
Well, that is far more common than one would care to admit. You see, you've just finally brought yours out of the closet. There are millions of such incidents, and people are now finally bringing them out of the closet because now they're no longer worried about the label of I'm going crazy or something like that.
Yeah, well, that was just what I thought. I could actually see myself so vividly, and I could feel the ceiling and the heat from the heater, and that was what really startled me. And I didn't think, if you took a trip like in a dream, you didn't have any feelings.
Yeah, that's right. Well, hopefully the next time that you can drop into that state and not be afraid of it, knowing full well that it's not going to hurt you or anything like that, and let it happen.
Yeah.
And then begin to explore it if you are at all curious.
I think the thing that bothered me was any time after that, I thought that maybe I'll go out there and never get back.
You'll always come back.
Doesn't work that way.
At least I did it.
Doesn't work that way.
Well, listen, thanks a lot. I'll have to get your book.
All right, good.
All right, Larry, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
That's an experience very similar to my brother when he came out to visit me a couple of years ago, and he found out what his younger brother was into. He confessed that he was angry at the kids and angry at his wife, and he was sort of half laying on the floor, half laying on the couch watching television. The next thing you knew, he was floating up. He thought this was fun. He was up in the attic and found some frayed wires. He'd never been up in the attic. Went on down to Texas Power and Light Company where he works, listened into the conversation of the guys down there while he was gone. Came back, thought he was crazy, went up in the attic the next day. There were the frayed wires, fixed them.
That was nice.
And then proceeded to tell the guys in the control room what they were talking about the night before.
And that all makes that thing, what do you need for proof?
Yeah, it's there. Let's go to Gina. Hi, Gina.
Hi. I'm real new about, learning metaphysics and stuff, and I've found out I have fears. I've been told I'm not grounded. Anyway, a few months ago, one night, I had been meditating, and I was really high. I'd gone to a really good workshop, and I was just kind of praying, oh, I want to be a channel for you, talking to God, whatever. And that night, I was very relaxed, and I felt my body being pulled up, and I sort of saw like an image of my body. It seemed like in the universe, and a lot of flashes, like electricity, really strong. It felt like fireworks. And the fear part of me, I mentioned I have a lot of fear, so the fear part of me was watching it, saying, "Oh God, what are you taking me? I thought you're supposed to be peaceful or whatever." And at the end, during the time anyway, there was this really peaceful part of me that it was like anything can touch me and nothing will harm me. But it was sort of scary because there was so much, like I said, flashes of electricity, fireworks, and also I think I saw like my chakras opening up. But at the end, I saw the word, it said alpha, and so I wasn't really sure. Like I said, all of this is real new to me. I had heard someone mention the word alpha, but later when I spoke to some friends, they said, "Oh, you were in an altered state," and I still don't know what that means. Was I out of my body, or?
It's very hard to give you an answer from the information that you're talking about, Gina. But when I hear those kinds of things, my response is, "Oh, please, why don't you go and explore it some more? Because it's such a wonderful opportunity, and don't miss it. Don't miss the opportunity that you have, and don't be afraid, because there's nothing to be afraid of."
Yeah, I was just like the other gentleman. I was afraid I wasn't going to come back.
But I have some very important news for you. the glue or magnetics that hold you into this physical life is very, very strong, so don't worry.
You will come back.
Okay.
You will come back.
Thank you.
All right, Gina, thank you for sharing that with us. And, Steve, you're on.
Hi, gentlemen. I'm absolutely in love with the notion of time travel. And my question is, if this is being done, why aren't some of the great unanswered questions being answered, such as who killed President Kennedy and why not stop Hitler before he started World War II, this kind of a thing? Why aren't the questions being answered? Why don't we know about it?
Are you saying before or after?
I'm sorry?
I say, are you asking the question why don't we explore these things?
I would think it's been explored already, or has it not?
To some degree, I think I have to give you the reason why not, which is one of the prime things. Why not find who killed President Kennedy, for example? The best description I can give you is that this it's an overview that one develops that who killed President Kennedy is really not important. And that's the only way I can put it. There are so many...
Who decides that?
I think the individual decides it himself. I mean, in other words, the person who begins to work in such a field, we have a label for that. And we call it local traffic. And there are so many more exciting and interesting things to investigate and get into that you really don't find supreme interest in finding that type of historical detail. And so you really found out the truth about what happened, say, to a President Kennedy. What you going to do with it? Well,
I suppose it's knowledge, but if there are more exciting things,
yes, that's what I'm trying to get at. We have an old-fashioned phrase that we use in that type of thing, and we have the difficulty with that. Our old-fashioned phrase is that how do you keep them down on the farm? And that's the phrase, when they seem free, you can't keep them down there. And that's the same thing. The attraction for other more exciting adventures or information is so great that it becomes downright boring to go into that type of information exploration.
What would be one example of that, Mr. Monroe?
Well, the prime one that we all look for, and we don't really know we're looking for it, but we unconsciously look for it. We look for the prime answers. In other words, very bluntly, is there a God? Were we created? Those kinds of questions. What do we do after we no longer exist physically? This is probably the most prime one present at the moment is what happens after we die. That's really, never mind anything else. What do we do then?
Yep. Are there any answers yet?
And that's much more important to you, is it not, than anything else you could find about a President Kennedy? Wouldn't you like to know what happens to you when you die?
There are a lot of questions I would like answered.
Well, that's what I mean. Let's get to the big ones instead of the things that are long gone, as it were.
What have you found happens when we die?
What?
What have you found in answering that question?
Well, we found very much that there's a very automatic and elaborate system that takes place when one passes that. The first thing that you do understand, which is a great revelation to so many people, and that is that no matter what they are here now, atheists, agnostics, whatever, that dying and surviving that physical death is a very automatic process. It's, you're gonna survive whether you like it or not. You don't just simply turn off. And that knowledge, I think, is a thing that does alter so many people's lives. Once they know it, not believe it, not hope it, not wish it, but know it. And there's a great difference. And knowing that, and knowing the more you learn of that process that takes place, and why you do indeed return back and have another physical life, that's important stuff.
Is that like reincarnation?
Well, our studies indicate it's not quite the way it's indicated by Eastern disciplines, for example. But this recycling does occur in an uncomfortably large amount, like thousands. But that's the type of thing that gets intriguing, and you can then begin to understand why it is that we don't investigate what happened 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 5,000 years ago so much. This attracts us much more.
I see.
Does that help?
It's a start.
All right.
Yeah, it sort of boggles the mind, I think, of all of us, Steve, to begin to grasp what is unfolding for these explorers as they move out of body and into realms that are beyond our comprehension, and their own, as far as that goes.
It's absolutely fascinating. If I may take another moment of your time, Bill, you had a show quite a while back on Rosemary Brown, who
yes.
Writes down other dead composers' music, and she was in the midst of writing Beethoven's 10th Symphony. This is a couple of years ago, I imagine now.
Right.
Has she finished it? Is there going to be
I don't think it's finished. For the last I had, Beethoven has a way of coming in and erasing everything he did the day before, which is quite keeping in character with him. But she is still turning out music, quite a lot of it.
I see.
But,
thanks very much.
All right, Steve, very good. And we have Volker on the line. Hello.
Are we here?
You're there, I think.
Okay, I'm really enjoying the show tonight, Bill, and it's really a pleasure to have Bob on the line. Bob, I have a question of you. I attended one of the Gateway Weekend programs in Los Angeles here last year, and as you know, out here, the highest we go on these Hemisync tapes is the Focus 12 states.
Yes.
And I'm very interested in having you folks come out here and do an advanced gateway presentation up to your standards that you attain in Virginia there. Is there a possibility of that happening in the future here?
Well, if we could find an appropriate site to do that, we recognize very much that it's quite difficult for people in California to travel all the way to Virginia. It's difficult and also expensive.
Right. There's a whole bunch of us out here that would just love to go up to those higher levels.
Why are you living on the wrong side of the country, Bob?
Well, I'll tell you why. There's a number of reasons, and one is that I like the seasons. We've had some floods here. It didn't affect us, but not that kind of season. But there's sort of a renaissance effect when you go through fall, winter, and spring. And I think that's the reason. I spent many years in and out of California, you know, but that was back in my show business days. So we will hope to do this, and if we can find a system whereby we can properly do it, because of that very reason. It's very difficult. It's a very complex method. This our Gateway Voyage program is not that simple to put together in another site other than our facility here. And we found that if we could find some way to do it on the West Coast, we certainly would.
I can understand the setup we had here was primitive in comparison, where everybody was just spread out along the floor in their sleeping bags and wired up to the headphones there.
If you can understand the difference here, we can house some 24 people, and I house it, and that means feeds and so on. And each one has an individual environmental chamber in which they work and they study and they go through exercises and everything like that. So, and those are like deprivation tanks, only they're not water, of course. And you have an entirely different situation, a different environment.
Right.
And we are much more concentrated here in the sense that there are no diversions. It's an intensive program, and we can control the whole environment. We're very much pastoral. We're way out in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, and it's all designed, the whole facility that we built here, to do just that, is to enhance this ability of consciousness. How to do that on the West Coast, I wish we could find a place.
Well, I'll try to think up a few things to do here.
Let us know.
Bob, I wondered if you might be able to provide me a couple of quick insights in two difficulties I'm having when I go out of body. The first is almost every time I get the preliminary vibrations, and when I start to rise out, I seem to run into a tremendous wall of pressure that even makes me very uncomfortable physically. And I have to get past this kind of a pressure barrier. It feels like something's sitting on my chest or caving in on me.
You should have learned a breathing exercise. And if you will employ that breathing exercise on a very much of a controlled thing, do you remember having an exercise in what we call resonant tuning?
Yes.
We have a tape cassette of that resonant tuning, and if you are proficient enough, you can simply use that to develop this breathing system and activate it, and that will, by all means, release this sense of heaviness.
Oh, that's great. I have the resonant tuning tape, and I've enjoyed it when I've used it, but I haven't made a habit of it. So. Well,
that's the first thing. And the second thing is that as you do begin these kinds of things, this type of practice, work into the process very, very gradually instead of trying to rush through it. Take your time. Mm-hmm. Most important. And if you do take your time on it, I think you will find as you do this and add to the third, in addition to taking your time, do the third thing. And that third thing is that when you feel that vibrational pattern, think of it going faster. And the way to do that is to sort of encourage it, that vibrational state, to move at a faster rate.
Right, I have learned how to do that as well.
And just get it moving faster than you can even think, and just think of it moving faster than you can conceive of.
Right, then it turns into kind of a hum almost, and just kind of a feeling of warmth and.
Yeah, exactly, and if you're that far, you're doing fine. All you got to do is practice it. Here I go again.
Yeah, well, my second problem, Bob, is once I'm out, my clarity of consciousness is not as high of a standard as I would hope. And when I am out, I find myself doing a lot of trivial or foolish things, like testing the texture of the walls and the material, and going through the window and trying to tap people on the shoulder as they're getting ready to go to work in the morning or something, and seeing if they notice me. And I'd like to really do something more constructive, but I seem to lack the presence of mind to be able to.
Right. That's great. Don't worry about that kind of thing. You're doing great. All you go through those stages of testing, going through the wall and the textures of it and this kind of stuff. That's great. Mm-hmm. Just play around with it. That's exactly what you do. That gives you a wonderful basis in which to go moving into the other areas.
Oh, good. Also, I'd like to know, can people write to you to find out what some of the educational applications of the Hemisync are?
Yes,
for instance,
indeed.
it's helpful for kids with dyslexia and such.
I haven't even mentioned those at all tonight.
Go right ahead and do it.
And it's run an extreme gamut of very productive uses, running from use in primary elementary school classrooms to enhance focusing of attention, and very spectacularly. And that's been operating on the West Coast, up in Washington and state of Washington, and also here in Virginia, I might add, in our own hometown, which we feel very proud about. And then at the college level, it's also been used for the same purpose. And that's in educational modes. Also, we've in one of the government training schools, we have been quite spectacular in that work in terms of increasing mental motor skills in very specific applications. And that's in the educational model. Also, moving on the other end of the scale in psychotherapy, it's a very, very fine means of accessing all the various memory and emotional and intellectual systems in a human, where you can release very much of the hidden traumas that so decimate a human personality, and those come out very nicely. Then applications in release from drug abuse has been quite productive in, I would say at least 30 or 40 cases.
That's fantastic.
So there are these other things, and one of the most spectacular has been in use during surgery, where recuperative time has been cut in half. Control of pain in post-surgical conditions has been even to the degree where no pain medication has been required. And this again is you fight the battle of the hospital, but that's another matter.
Right. Are these studies available to a non-professional person with an interest in that?
They're limited within our professional membership, but they are available to professional people, or, for example, and to your doctor if that's the case. In other words, but generally speaking, we do not release those publicly because they are experimental use. I'll put it that way.
Oh, I see. Okay, I've been reading your book all day, and I put it down to listen to you live on the show because I'd rather listen to you as closely as I can in person rather than...
Are you reading the new book?
Oh, I love it, and I think the implications of it in terms of the interaction of these other beings with our space-time level here is just really mind-boggling in terms of what that's going to produce in the future.
And it looks like it is, too.
Okay, well, I'll let some of the other people on now and turn off my radio.
All right, Booker, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's Open Mind. I'm Bill Jenkins. Robert Monroe is with me. His new book is...
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, in view that consciousness survives death, shouldn't that revolutionize our whole hospital and funeral industry? People report being aware that they're pronounced dead, being terrified that they'll be put on ice or, find themselves on the coroner's table. Then think of all the people in the intensive care units with their hands tied to the bed, having out-of-body experiences and then returning back into the body in this terrifying state with the tube in their nose. And, it seems that these experiences deserve a pleasant setting in which to experience the infinite unconscious. Am I getting through to you at all? Or it seems that aspect of it is never...
How can one answer a question or a statement like that other than to say yes?
That aspect of it is never mentioned. What is that noise in here? Ever since the near-death experience has started reaching the public, everybody's been overjoyed that the death experience is pleasant. It is pleasant, but the traditional way of handling it is very terrifying. And that is the only part of it that's unpleasant. A lady reported, having a near-death experience, and, she woke up to find herself all tied up in a sheet and her hands all tied up, and it was only by a fluke of effort that she was able to wiggle her little toe. But think of all the others,
Well, I think it would be well, Sue, if the medical profession took a little more interest in the study that Mr. Monroe and his group are doing, and others, too. We'll certainly be going into that in some detail next week with Diane Morrissey on the near-death experience. Which you might find interesting.
I'm saying a little more than that. I'm saying that our present way of handling it is reminiscent of some kind of a Dracula Tales of Horror type approach. Where people are,
right.
The embalmer, the sutures the neck, and
primitive is the word.
The primitive, right? It would scare a witch doctor. So it's a really terrifying, nightmarish thing. And other than that, the death experience has been reported to be very pleasant, but it can turn into a nightmare under those conditions. And I think, that people should get behind that, the right to death the way they're getting on the right to life. In other words, fuse the abortion, the right to life movement with the right to death movement.
Because I think you hit a very, very profound chord in our human understanding. Yes, the right to death and the right to die the way you would like to.
Right.
And I think that there is progress in that, and there are ways, for example, now that you can preset and hold in your immediate file, as it were, statements on what you want done with you and your remaining thing you've discarded called a body upon your death, or if you are incapacitated to the point where you are no longer can live in any form, that you have the right to die. And you can get very legal statements these days and have them ready if you enter any of those types of conditions. And I certainly would advise anyone to do this because of the fact of what happens to you culturally if you don't.
Well, of course, emergency victims don't have